The restaurant was alive with quiet energy, the soft clatter of cutlery and the low hum of conversations filling the air. Warm lights glowed over polished tables, reflecting off wine glasses, giving the space an elegant yet welcoming atmosphere. It was the kind of place where people came to feel important, yet the charm of the room softened the weight of its exclusivity. Waiters moved quickly and efficiently, each one performing their tasks with practiced ease. Among them was a young waitress, moving between tables with calm determination, her steps measured, her focus sharp. She had been working there for years, and she knew how to keep the rhythm of the restaurant smooth, even when things got chaotic. That evening, a particularly high-profile table arrived. A man dressed impeccably in a suit with subtle but unmistakable signs of wealth sat with a woman whose presence seemed to demand attention. Every movement she made was deliberate, every glance calculated, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from a life of privilege. The young waitress felt a familiar twinge of tension as she approached, carrying menus with a practiced smile. "Good evening, welcome," she said softly, placing the menus in front of them. Her tone was polite, neutral, professional. The man barely looked up, his fingers scrolling across his phone. The woman, however, tapped her nails impatiently on the table and gave a sharp, assessing glance. She opened the menu with deliberate slowness, as if she had all the time in the world and expected everyone else to wait on her schedule. The waitress leaned slightly, pointing out the specials with a gentle suggestion. "Our chef recommends the roasted salmon tonight. It's served with a light lemon glaze and fresh vegetables. It's very popular." The woman barely acknowledged her words, frowning slightly, and the waitress had the immediate sense that no matter what she said, it would not be enough. She had learned over the years that some people simply wanted someone to belittle, and their mood had nothing to do with reality. Moments later, the first complaint arrived. The woman held up her water glass, her brow furrowed. "Is this really the coldest you can make it?" she asked sharply, her voice carrying across the table. The young waitress felt a small flutter of nerves, but maintained her composure. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she replied. "I'll bring a new glass right away." She moved quickly to the side station, exchanged the water, and returned to the table, keeping her tone calm, steady, and professional. The woman's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice but loud enough for nearby tables to catch. "Are you always this slow?" Her words had a sting, designed to humiliate. The waitress smiled politely, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I want to make sure everything is perfect for you." Her calmness contrasted sharply with the woman's sharp words. She didn't argue, didn't show irritation. She simply focused on resolving the issue efficiently. Nearby diners noticed the tension. Some whispered to each other, exchanging glances of disbelief, while others quietly returned to their meals, unsure whether to watch or ignore the scene. Staff members exchanged brief, knowing looks, understanding the delicate balance required when serving someone who demanded attention but didn't respect others. The woman, sensing she had a captive audience, continued. Her complaints grew louder, her tone sharper. "I can't believe this. Is it really too much to ask for a simple glass of water?" she asked, punctuating the words with an exaggerated sigh. The waitress nodded politely and moved quickly to fulfill the request. Bringing a fresh glass without a word of complaint, her composure drew subtle admiration from other diners. While the woman tried to assert control through humiliation, the waitress maintained quiet authority through competence and calm. Each time the woman found a new flaw, whether in the menu descriptions, the placement of silverware, or even the angle of the chair, the waitress responded with patience, never letting the anger draw her in. The man at the table, busy with his phone, gave the occasional glance, his expression neutral, almost detached. It was clear he was aware of the unfolding tension, but chose not to intervene. That small observation didn't escape the waitress. She noticed the silence, recognized it as tacit consent, but refused to let it shake her focus. Her attention remained on the table and the restaurant around her. The woman's irritation grew with each interaction. She leaned back, shaking her head in exaggerated frustration. "Honestly, I don't know how places like this stay open with service this slow," she said loudly. Her words carried across the room, causing heads to turn. The waitress did not flinch. She kept her voice soft and polite. "I sincerely apologize for any delay. I'll make sure everything is perfect for you," she replied. She did not argue, did not justify herself, and did not allow the attempt to humiliate her to provoke an emotional response. Her quiet professionalism was a lesson in dignity, though few in the room understood it fully. It was clear to everyone, however, that she had not lost control. While the woman attempted to dominate with anger and words, the waitress controlled the situation with calmness and action. As the meal continued, the woman found new targets for her impatience. She criticized the bread service, the temperature of the room, and even the lighting above their table. Each complaint seemed carefully chosen to draw attention to herself and away from any personal responsibility. Yet every time, the waitress met her with quiet attentiveness, acknowledging concerns and offering solutions without defensiveness. Other diners couldn't help but notice. There was a subtle contrast between arrogance and humility, entitlement and patience. Some whispered among themselves, sharing quiet admiration for the waitress's handling of the situation, though she remained unaware of the attention she was receiving. At one point, the woman whispered something to the man beside her, who glanced up from his phone, nodded slightly, and returned to scrolling. He remained silent as the woman continued her verbal tirade, leaving the waitress to navigate the storm alone. Yet she did so with grace. Her movements efficient, her smile polite, her words measured. Even the staff began to notice small things. The way she adjusted a wine glass without being asked, how she corrected a napkin's position with a subtle hand, how she checked on other tables while managing the demanding one. Her attention to detail and calm under pressure made her quietly extraordinary. Though no one outside the restaurant would have guessed it, the woman finally escalated her annoyance to the timing of dessert. "Really? It's still not here? How long does it take to serve something so simple?" she demanded, raising her voice slightly. The waitress acknowledged the concern immediately, explaining politely the timing and assuring her that it would arrive momentarily. She moved swiftly to coordinate with the kitchen, ensuring there were no further delays. Throughout, the waitress never allowed anger or embarrassment to seep into her actions. She maintained a level of professionalism that disarmed the situation, showing that patience and competence could speak louder than shouting or cruelty. Her quiet confidence, though unnoticed by the woman, began to leave an impression on nearby diners. Finally, the meal concluded. The woman tossed her napkin onto the table with an air of finality, muttering something under her breath about poor service. The young waitress nodded politely, thanked them, and wished them a good evening. She watched them leave, noticing the subtle reactions of other diners, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering in surprise at the audacity displayed. As the door closed behind them, the waitress allowed herself a small, deep breath. She had weathered the storm of arrogance and entitlement, remaining calm and dignified. Her colleagues offered approving smiles and small nods, acknowledging her grace under pressure. The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the impression of the encounter lingered. Cleaning up and restocking, she reflected quietly. The humiliation had been real, but her response had been stronger. She had not retaliated, had not raised her voice, had not allowed pride to be wounded by words meant to diminish her. Instead, she had displayed a quiet power, the ability to maintain composure, dignity, and respect in the face of unnecessary cruelty. It was a lesson she carried with her. No few in the room understood it fully. True strength, she realized, was not loud. It did not need to be acknowledged by others. It was in the calm patience of handling difficulty gracefully, in the quiet assurance of knowing one's own worth, and in the choice to remain dignified. No matter how others behaved, the restaurant buzzed softly around her, lights reflecting off glasses and cutlery. But she moved with a sense of purpose and control. In her own mind, the evening was a victory. Not because she had changed the woman's behavior, but because she had held on to her own integrity. She had faced someone determined to humiliate her and had emerged unbroken, poised, and in command of her own actions. It was a victory that belonged entirely to her, quiet and uncelebrated, yet powerful nonetheless. The morning after the incident, the restaurant was quieter than usual. The sunlight streaming through the large windows cast in long patterns across the wooden floor. The young waitress arrived early, tying her apron and organizing the service area with the same careful attention she always gave. The previous night's events lingered in her mind, but she didn't let them weigh her down. She had handled everything with calm, and now it was time to focus on the day ahead. Her coworkers, while polite, couldn't help but bring up what had happened. "That was rough last night," one of them said softly as she passed by. "She really went all out." The waitress nodded slightly, offering a small, calm smile. "It happens," she replied. Her voice was neutral, almost serene, but there was something in her tone that made her colleagues pause. There was no bitterness, no gossip, just quiet strength. It was the kind of response that made others realize she was different from most people they knew. As she moved through her routine, she noticed small things around the restaurant that many would overlook. A slightly crooked chair, a faint smudge on a glass, a napkin that needed straightening. She corrected them without fanfare. She didn't need anyone to see her doing these things. Her attention to detail was instinctive, the kind of habit that made the restaurant function smoothly, even when chaos threatened. Later, a few regular customers came in, smiling as they recognized her. They greeted her warmly, and she remembered their favorite orders without looking at notes. There was a sense of familiarity in her interactions with them, an easy confidence that put people at ease. It was part of what made her good at her job, her ability to make everyone feel seen, even when she herself was under pressure. Meanwhile, word of the previous evening's incident had quietly spread. Some diners had discussed it online, others in hushed conversations in offices and cafes. The story of the woman's public arrogance and the waitress's calm composure had piqued curiosity. People were fascinated by how the waitress had handled herself. What they didn't know, and what made the story even more compelling, was that she was far more than the uniform suggested, unbeknownst to her colleagues and most customers. She had a side of her life that was completely hidden. She wasn't just a waitress. She had an understanding of business that many could only dream of, a sharp mind honed over years of experience. The restaurant where she worked was part of a larger empire, one she had helped build in ways most people would never guess. She worked among the staff not because she needed to, but because she believed in understanding the business from the ground up. She wanted to see how employees were treated, how customers were handled, and where improvements could be made. This dual life gave her a perspective few could ever imagine. She saw the restaurant through two lenses, one as an owner, analyzing every detail of operations, and one as a worker, engaging with guests in the intimate, human way that mattered most. It was this combination that made her calm under pressure. She knew that no momentary humiliation or rude behavior could define her. She had bigger things in mind, and she understood that dignity was a choice. As the morning continued, the restaurant staff prepared for the lunch crowd. The young waitress moved among them efficiently, helping with orders, checking table arrangements, and offering gentle guidance where needed. Even the most seasoned waiters noticed her leadership style. It was quiet but effective. She didn't demand attention or respect. She earned it naturally, through competence and calm authority. By midday, the restaurant was full, the air filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread and sizzling dishes. She navigated through the tables with ease, attending to each customer with care. A few patrons whispered compliments, impressed with the level of service, though no one yet knew the full story behind the woman who had been humiliated the night before. Back in the kitchen, she observed the staff carefully, noting minor inefficiencies that could be improved. She jotted down small suggestions in her mind, not to embarrass anyone, but to make the restaurant run better for everyone. Her presence was both familiar and commanding. People responded to her without realizing why. It wasn't fear or authority. It was respect earned through years of competence and genuine care. Throughout the day, she couldn't help but think about the couple from the night before. She didn't feel anger, only a quiet curiosity. What drives someone to behave that way? She wondered. Was it entitlement, insecurity, or simply a lack of awareness? She didn't know, and she didn't need to. The woman's actions didn't matter. What mattered was how she responded, and she had responded with grace. Later, a few of the staff members approached her during a brief lull. "Honestly, I don't know how you do it," one said quietly. "She was terrible last night, but you didn't even lose your cool." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "It's not about losing your cool," she replied. "It's about doing your job well and treating people with respect, even when they don't do the same." Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made her colleagues nod in understanding. As the lunch rush ended, the young waitress finally had a moment to breathe. She leaned against a counter, taking stock of the restaurant and her staff. Her mind was always analyzing, always thinking a step ahead. She noticed patterns, how the staff interacted, how customers responded to certain behaviors, even how the lighting affected the mood. She had an instinct for these things, a skill developed over time, and it made her uniquely capable. That evening, as the restaurant quieted down, she found herself alone in a corner, reflecting on the day. The humiliation from the night before had faded, replaced by a sense of calm accomplishment. She had faced someone who tried to diminish her, and she had emerged unshaken. It wasn't just about patience or skill. It was about knowing her own worth, about understanding that other people's arrogance was a reflection of them, not her, and there was more to come. She knew that the story of the previous night would not end quietly. People had noticed her composure, the stark contrast between her dignity and the other woman's entitlement. Rumors would spread, curiosity would grow, and eventually, the truth about who she really was, her power, her influence, her ownership would come to light. But for now, she worked in silence, letting her actions speak louder than words. She moved through the restaurant with quiet confidence, checking tables, adjusting napkins, and smiling politely at guests. She treated everyone equally, with kindness and respect, because she believed in it deeply. Even the staff began to emulate her calm approach, realizing that true authority didn't shout, it guided. By the end of the day, the restaurant was ready to close, and she finally took a moment for herself. She straightened her apron, wiped her hands, and looked around at the space she cared for so deeply. It was more than just a job. It was part of a larger world she had built, a world she understood intimately from the ground up. And even though the woman from the previous night had tried to humiliate her publicly, she had shown that strength was quiet, dignity was deliberate, and respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned. And it could be given freely to those who deserved it. As she locked up for the night, she felt a quiet anticipation. The story was far from over. There were people who thought they had power over her, who believed they could humiliate her without consequence. But they didn't know the full truth yet. They didn't know that the young waitress who had served them so politely, who had met rudeness with grace, was someone who had built an empire, someone who understood power in ways they could not imagine. And one day they would learn, and the balance of control would shift in ways they never expected. For now, she smiled to herself, letting the quiet victory settle in. Patience, skill, and dignity had carried her through. The next chapter of this story, she knew, would be even more revealing, and she was ready. The days after the incident with the wealthy couple passed quietly at first, but the memory of that night lingered in the minds of the staff and a few patrons. The young waitress moved through the restaurant with her usual calm and focus, but there was a subtle change in her demeanor. She seemed more assured, more in control, not just of her movements and words, but of the environment itself. It was as if the incident had awakened something deeper within her, a sense of authority that did not require recognition or applause. The morning started like any other, sunlight spilling through the windows, reflecting softly on the polished surfaces. She arrived early, slipping into the staff room to organize orders, check the schedules, and prepare for the day. Her coworkers greeted her with smiles and small nods, a quiet respect evident in their interactions. Some of them whispered about her poise, amazed at how she had handled the couple's rudeness. She offered them polite acknowledgement, her tone warm but measured. She never boasted, never drew attention to herself, yet her influence was undeniable. During the early hours, she walked through the dining area, observing tables, chairs, and the flow of the room. Her eyes caught small details that most would overlook: a napkin slightly out of place, a chair angled wrong, a subtle smudge on a glass. She adjusted each one with a practiced hand, moving with the kind of precision that came from years of experience. Her colleagues watched in silence, some shaking their heads in quiet admiration. She seemed to operate on a level beyond ordinary awareness, and though she was technically just a waitress to everyone else, her presence commanded attention. Behind the scenes, she stepped into a small office tucked away from the public eye. Here, she was not a waitress at all. She was the owner, someone who had quietly built the restaurant into a small empire over the years. The books, records, and reports were all hers to review, and she approached them with the same meticulous care she applied to her service. She scanned inventory, staffing patterns, and customer feedback, noting every detail that could improve efficiency and the overall experience. Her mind worked constantly, analyzing patterns, predicting outcomes, and anticipating problems before they arose. While the staff busied themselves in the dining area, she spent a few moments reflecting on the events of the previous week. The wealthy woman's rudeness had been an irritation, but also a learning moment. It had revealed the contrast between entitlement and humility, arrogance and quiet authority. She had handled the situation with dignity, allowing the couple's behavior to speak for itself, while she maintained composure. She did not feel anger only, a quiet satisfaction in knowing she had remained unshaken. By mid-morning, the restaurant began to fill with patrons. Regulars greeted her warmly, some commenting on the exceptional service they had received before. She smiled politely, remembering their preferences and noting small details that would enhance their experience. She took orders with ease, refilled drinks, and checked on tables, all while observing the subtle interactions of staff and guests. It was part of her philosophy that leadership was shown not through shouting or dominance, but through awareness, attentiveness, and consistency. A few staff members approached her during a quiet lull, asking questions about procedures or seeking advice. She guided them gently, offering practical suggestions without lecturing. Her words were precise, her tone calm, and her presence reassuring. Even the most inexperienced servers seemed to respond naturally to her guidance, unconsciously recognizing the authority she carried. It was not forceful or aggressive. It was simply the weight of experience and competence. As the day wore on, She began planning minor changes that would improve operations. She thought about staff training, the timing of orders, and even the layout of the dining area. Each adjustment was small, subtle, but cumulatively significant. She communicated with managers quietly, suggesting improvements without disrupting the workflow. Her approach was methodical and deliberate. She understood that lasting change came from thoughtful observation and patient implementation, not sudden commands. The afternoon brought a lull, giving her time to observe patrons more closely. She noticed how they reacted to the staff, how they interacted with each other, and even how the atmosphere of the room influenced mood. Her mind cataloged everything: the successful interactions, the awkward moments, the minor frustrations, using them as data for future improvement. Her dual role as both observer and participant gave her a perspective few could match. She was simultaneously part of the human experience and the structural backbone that supported it. Then, unexpectedly, the wealthy couple from the previous week appeared at the entrance. The woman's expression was sharp, her movements precise, but there was a tension in her body that hadn't been there before. The man followed, scrolling on his phone, seemingly indifferent, though he occasionally glanced at the surroundings. Neither of them realized the young waitress's deeper role in the restaurant. They still saw her as a server, someone they might belittle or test. As they were seated, she approached with her usual calm smile. She greeted them politely, taking their orders and engaging in light conversation while observing their subtle reactions. The woman tried to assert her dominance again, making remarks about the timing of service and the arrangement of the table. Yet this time, the young waitress responded with a confidence that was impossible to unsettle. Her voice was steady, neutral, and courteous, but there was an underlying strength that the woman could not ignore. It was as if she sensed the waitress was more than she appeared, though she could not yet comprehend the extent. Throughout the evening, she managed the table flawlessly. Timing, presentation, and service were all handled with precision. She subtly guided the experience, ensuring the couple received exceptional service while maintaining control of the situation. Every minor challenge posed by the woman was met with calm efficiency, redirecting the energy without confrontation. The man, still largely absorbed in his phone, occasionally glanced up, noticing the quiet authority with a flicker of recognition. He could not explain that other diners and staff watched from a distance, noticing the subtle power dynamics at play. The young waitress remained composed, moving gracefully and maintaining focus, while the wealthy woman fumed, unable to assert control. It was a display of quiet strength versus overt arrogance, patience versus impulsivity. The contrast was evident, even to casual observers, and it left a lasting impression on everyone present. After the couple left, she ensured the table was cleared and reset perfectly. Her colleagues offered small, approving nods, and she responded with a polite smile. There was no celebration, no self-congratulation, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had handled the situation with skill. Her calm had diffused tension, maintained dignity, and demonstrated authority without confrontation. Once the restaurant emptied for the night, she reviewed the day's operations. Staff schedules, customer interactions, inventory, everything was accounted for, and she noted areas for improvement. She reflected on the wealthy couple's visit, considering the subtle ways her calm authority had shifted the dynamic. It was a small victory, invisible to the untrained eye, but meaningful to her. She understood that influence was often hidden, and power did not need to be broadcast to be effective. As she locked up, she took a moment to stand outside and breathe in the cool night air. The city was quiet, the hum of distant traffic barely audible. She thought about the week's events, the arrogant woman, the curious onlookers, the staff who relied on her guidance. Everything had unfolded in a way that reinforced her philosophy. True authority came from skill, patience, and quiet confidence. She did not need recognition or praise. Her actions spoke for themselves, and their impact was felt even when unnoticed. She knew the story was far from over. The wealthy woman would eventually learn more about the young waitress's true role and influence. When that happened, the balance would shift, but she was ready. She had learned to navigate arrogance and entitlement, to maintain composure under pressure, and to assert control through skill and wisdom rather than confrontation. The next chapter would bring challenges, but she was prepared to meet them with the same calm determination. The young waitress walked home slowly, her thoughts focused on the future. She considered subtle adjustments for the restaurant, improvements in staff training, and strategies to enhance customer experience. Every observation, every reflection, was part of her larger understanding of human behavior and business operations. She had learned to see beyond appearances, to recognize true potential and hidden strengths. It was this perspective that allowed her to navigate life with confidence, even when others underestimated her dot as she approached her apartment. She paused for a moment and reflected on the week. The humiliation of the previous encounter had become a lesson in resilience and strategy. It had revealed the depth of her own patience and authority. She had maintained dignity while observing others' weaknesses, and in doing so, had demonstrated a quiet but undeniable power. She understood that real influence was measured not by dominance, but by subtle control, thoughtful action, and unwavering composure. Inside, she settled into her evening routine, reviewing notes for the restaurant and planning the coming week. She considered how to improve operations, enhance staff skills, and anticipate challenges before they arose. Every decision was deliberate, informed by both experience and intuition. She knew that true leadership was not about being seen. It was about understanding, guiding, and quietly shaping outcomes. As she prepared for bed, a faint smile crossed her face. The week had been intense, filled with moments that tested her patience and composure. Yet she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of her influence. The wealthy woman's arrogance had been a test, one she had passed without faltering. The next steps in the story were uncertain, but she was ready. She knew that patience, skill, and quiet authority would guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. And that respect earned through action would always outweigh superficial entitlement. And as the city outside her window settled into night, she drifted to sleep with a sense of calm anticipation. The world was moving, events were unfolding, and her influence was quietly shaping outcomes in ways most people would never see. But she did not need them to see. She understood the power of patience, the impact of quiet authority, and the value of dignity in the face of arrogance. And she was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed the couple's visit were unusually busy for the restaurant. Reservations had doubled, some made by people curious about the young waitress who had handled the wealthy woman so gracefully. Patrons whispered about her calm composure and efficiency, but no one suspected the truth. She was far more than a waitress. She moved among the tables with her usual poise, refilling glasses, adjusting plates, and attending to needs with gentle efficiency, all while keeping an eye on the bigger picture. Back in the office, she reviewed reports quietly. Orders, staffing schedules, customer feedback, all of it was part of a system she understood intimately. She noted minor inefficiencies and made subtle adjustments that would improve service without anyone noticing. Her mind worked constantly, balancing the immediate demands of service with the long-term vision of the restaurant's success. She was always thinking 2 steps ahead, anticipating challenges before they arose. That afternoon, a familiar sound echoed through the entrance. The wealthy couple had returned unexpectedly. This time, the woman's expression was sharper, her posture more rigid. There was a tension in her movements that suggested she remembered the humiliation from the previous visit. She scanned the dining room impatiently, her eyes landing on the young waitress as she moved between tables with her quiet confidence. The waitress noticed her immediately, but her face remained calm, polite, and unbothered, the woman tried to assert control with the same sharp comments as before. "I hope the service is faster this time," she said, her tone pointed. The young waitress smiled politely, acknowledging the remark without reacting emotionally. "Of course, ma'am. I'll ensure everything is perfect for you," she said in her usual calm tone. There was a subtle firmness in her voice that the woman could not place, a quiet authority that made her hesitate, even if she didn't yet understand why. Throughout the meal, the young waitress guided the experience seamlessly. Orders arrived at the perfect pace, dishes were presented elegantly, and the staff moved efficiently under her subtle direction. Every small detail, the angle of the chairs, the placement of silverware, the timing of refills, was managed with precision. The couple began to notice that something was different. The waitress no longer seemed like a mere employee. There was an unmistakable air of control and competence that radiated from her, and it unsettled the woman more than she realized. By the time dessert arrived, the woman was visibly tense. She glanced around, noticing subtle changes in the restaurant that she could not explain. The young waitress had orchestrated the evening without drawing attention to herself, yet the effect was undeniable. Service was impeccable, atmosphere perfect, and yet the woman felt powerless, aware of her own inability to dominate the situation as she had tried before. After the couple left, the young waitress walked to the office under the pretense of handling paperwork. She closed the door behind her and reviewed the events of the evening. She reflected on the subtle shifts in the couple's behavior and noted how the woman had been forced to confront the reality that her attempts at humiliation had failed. She had won not through confrontation, but through quiet authority, skill, and understanding, a lesson the woman would not forget. The next day, the woman returned to inquire about something she had noticed during her last visit. She requested a meeting with the manager, curious and somewhat cautious. When she arrived, she was surprised to find the young waitress herself greeting her in the private office. The woman expected someone deferential, someone who would reassure her or make excuses. Instead, she found herself face to face with someone calm, composed, and entirely in control. "I wanted to understand how the service was so precise," the woman began, trying to mask her curiosity with a polite tone. "It was exceptional, even though last time I found it lacking." Her words were careful, betraying a mix of embarrassment and intrigue. The young waitress smiled gently, maintaining her composure. "Thank you for your feedback. We aim to provide the best experience for our guests. Every detail matters." There was no arrogance in her tone, no hint of superiority, but there was a quiet confidence that made the woman pause. She began to sense that the waitress knew far more than she let on. I'm surprised at how well everything ran," the woman admitted. "It's almost as if someone was overseeing everything." She leaned slightly forward, curiosity overtaking her pride. "Are you involved in management?" The young waitress nodded softly. "I oversee operations to ensure everything runs smoothly. I believe in understanding every aspect of the restaurant, from the kitchen to the dining room, so that every guest has a positive experience." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that the woman could not ignore. The realization began to dawn on her slowly. The waitress she had tried to humiliate was not just an employee. She had authority, knowledge, and influence far beyond what anyone could have expected. The woman's previous assumptions about power, control, and entitlement were challenged in a single moment. She had misjudged someone she thought she could dominate, and it left her unsettled. For the young waitress, this was a pivotal moment, though she did not gloat or revel in the other woman's discomfort. She simply maintained her composure, allowing the truth to reveal itself naturally. Her quiet authority, patience, and competence had already spoken volumes. Now, the woman was beginning to understand it for herself. Over the following days, the restaurant's atmosphere subtly shifted. Patrons began to notice the young waitress's influence more clearly. Staff treated her with even greater respect, and customers responded with admiration to her calm, attentive service. Word of her skill and quiet authority spread, though her ownership and power remained largely hidden. She had cultivated an environment where excellence was standard, yet her presence did not feel overbearing. The wealthy woman, however, could not forget the encounter. She returned occasionally, observing discreetly, trying to gauge the extent of the young waitress's influence. She began to see patterns she had missed before. The seamless coordination of staff, the flawless timing of service, and the subtle improvements in the restaurant that suggested someone with a deep understanding was guiding everything. Each visit chipped away at her previous sense of superiority, replacing it with a reluctant respect. One evening, the woman finally spoke to a staff member quietly, seeking information about the young waitress. She learned of her hidden involvement, her ownership stake, and her meticulous attention to every detail of the business. The revelation stunned her. She realized that the person she had tried to humiliate was the very individual who controlled the restaurant's success. The person whose calm authority had orchestrated every experience they had encountered, the young waitress. Meanwhile, continued her work with her usual focus. She did not confront the woman directly about her previous behavior. Instead, she let her actions speak. Service remained impeccable, staff interactions were smooth, and customers continued to leave satisfied. Through patience and subtle influence, she had demonstrated her power without needing to assert it aggressively. By the end of the week, the wealthy woman had changed her behavior significantly when visiting the restaurant. There was no open arrogance or attempts at humiliation. Instead, she approached with cautious politeness, aware that the young waitress was someone far beyond her previous assumptions. The dynamic had shifted, and the woman had no choice but to recognize it. Respect had been earned quietly, without confrontation, and it was undeniable. The young waitress reflected on the changes with a quiet satisfaction. Her approach had been consistent. Observe, understand, act thoughtfully, and maintain composure. She had faced arrogance and entitlement, and in doing so, had revealed the true nature of her authority. It was not loud or boastful. It was subtle, deliberate, and profoundly effective. The woman's attitude, the staff's respect, and the patron's admiration were all evidence. That quiet competence often had a greater impact than overt power. As she prepared to close the restaurant for the night, she glanced around the dining area. Tables were reset perfectly, chairs aligned, and the soft hum of the air conditioning created a calm atmosphere. Everything was in place, not by chance, but by design. She had shaped it carefully, balancing human interaction with operational efficiency. Her presence was invisible in its subtlety, yet omnipresent in its effect. She walked out into the cool night air, reflecting on the week's events. The story of the wealthy woman's humiliation, her own composure, and the slow reveal of her influence had all unfolded naturally. She had demonstrated that true authority comes from skill, patience, and quiet confidence. It was not something that demanded attention. It simply commanded it through results and presence. The young waitress knew that more challenges lay ahead, but she was ready. She had faced entitlement and arrogance before, and she had done so with dignity and skill. She understood that power was most effective when exercised subtly, through thoughtful action and careful observation. The restaurant thrived not because of displays of dominance, but because of her quiet guidance, her attention to detail, and her ability to understand people. And so, as the city settled into night and the lights of the restaurant dimmed, she walked home with a calm anticipation. She had faced tests of patience and dignity, emerged unshaken, and revealed her influence in ways the world was only beginning to recognize. The balance had shifted, and those who had underestimated her were learning that quiet authority, skill, and composure often wield more power than arrogance ever could. The next morning, the restaurant opened with the usual hum of activity. Sunlight spilled through the windows, catching the polished surfaces and casting soft shadows across the tables. The young waitress arrived early, slipping into her apron with her usual calm precision. Today, however, there was a subtle anticipation in her steps. Something was about to change, though she did not need to rush or force it. She had learned over the years that patience and timing mattered as much as skill as she began her routine checking tables. Organizing supplies and greeting the staff, there was a quiet sense of focus in the air. The employees seemed more alert, more attentive, and a few glanced at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. She moved among them effortlessly, guiding, correcting, and advising, all with a gentle hand. No one needed to be told who held authority. It was evident in every decision she made and every subtle action she took. The wealthy woman from before arrived again, accompanied by a friend this time. She paused at the entrance, her eyes scanning the dining room. She seemed hesitant, as if unsure what to expect. The young waitress noticed her immediately, but maintained her calm demeanor. She approached with her usual polite smile. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome back. How can I help you today?" Her voice was soft but steady, carrying a subtle confidence that immediately set the tone. The woman hesitated, then said, I wanted to understand how you manage everything so well. Last time I noticed the way the restaurant runs is very different from anywhere else I've been." Her words were careful, measured, but they betrayed genuine curiosity. The young waitress nodded politely. "Thank you. I make it a priority to understand all parts of the restaurant, from staff to kitchen operations, so our guests can enjoy a smooth experience. Every detail matters." The woman's eyes widened slightly, as though the words confirmed something she had begun to suspect, but had not fully realized. There was a pause before she continued, softer this time. "So, you're not just a server. You oversee everything?" The young waitress smiled faintly, acknowledging the truth without boasting. "Yes, I'm responsible for operations, staffing, and customer experience. I work here as a server as well, because it allows me to understand what our guests see and feel firsthand. It's important to me to see the restaurant from every perspective." The woman leaned back in her chair, processing the revelation. She thought about her previous attempts to humiliate this young woman, the arrogance she had displayed, and the calm dignity with which the waitress had handled it. A flush of embarrassment crossed her face. The realization that she had misjudged someone so completely left her momentarily speechless. You own this?" she asked finally, her voice quieter than before, almost reverent. The young waitress nodded. "I do. And I also believe in guiding the team, supporting our staff, and making sure our guests are treated well. It's not about showing power. It's about creating an environment where respect and excellence are the standard." The woman's expression softened. There was no more arrogance, no attempt at superiority. She had come face to face with someone who had quietly built an empire while appearing ordinary. The impact of that contrast humbled her. She realized that true authority came from skill, patience, and understanding, not entitlement or wealth. Over the next few minutes, the young waitress answered questions politely, explaining small details about how she ran the restaurant, how she trained staff, and how she ensured every customer had a great experience. The woman listened, intrigued, and quietly impressed. The dynamic between them had shifted completely. What had once been tension and condescension had transformed into respect and admiration. Later, When the woman and her friend left, she lingered for a moment, reflecting on the experience. She had come with an attitude of superiority, expecting to assert control, but she left with a deep appreciation for someone who had achieved far more than she could have imagined. The young waitress's quiet authority, skill, and dedication had left an impression she would not forget. Meanwhile, the young waitress continued her day, attending to customers, guiding her staff, and making subtle improvements to operations. The restaurant ran smoothly, with every small detail under her careful observation. She had faced arrogance, managed it with grace, and revealed her true influence without the need for confrontation. Her patience and composure had transformed the situation entirely. By evening, the restaurant had a calm, thriving energy. Patrons enjoyed their meals, staff worked efficiently, and the young waitress moved through it all with her usual balance of attentiveness and quiet authority. The events with the wealthy woman had not distracted her. Instead, they reinforced her philosophy that true power is shown through action, not words. As she closed up for the night, she reflected on how far she had come. The attempts to humiliate her had only highlighted her resilience, patience, and understanding. She had remained composed, observed carefully, and allowed the truth of her skills and influence to emerge naturally. In doing so, she had shown that respect is earned, not demanded. Walking home under the soft glow of streetlights, she felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The arrogant woman had learned a lesson in humility. The staff had seen the impact of quiet authority, and the restaurant thrived because of her guidance. It was a quiet victory, not celebrated with fanfare, but profound in its effect. That night, she thought about the lessons of the past weeks. Arrogance and entitlement were temporary, but skill, patience, and dignity lasted. She had faced challenges with grace, maintained control without confrontation, and revealed her influence in ways that commanded respect naturally. She understood now, more than ever, that true authority comes not from appearances, but from competence, awareness, and integrity. In the following days, the restaurant continued to flourish. Word spread about the young waitress, whose calm composure had transformed an encounter with arrogance into an example of quiet strength. Patrons returned, curious to experience the restaurant where leadership and excellence were so evident. The staff worked efficiently, inspired by her example, and the restaurant's reputation grew steadily. The wealthy woman, now fully aware of the waitress's true role and influence, began to approach interactions differently. She treated the young woman with respect, occasionally seeking advice, no longer trying to assert dominance. What had once been a source of tension became an unexpected opportunity for the woman to learn from someone she had once underestimated. The young waitress, however, remained unchanged. She did not gloat or seek recognition. Her focus stayed on the work on serving customers well, guiding staff, and continuously improving the restaurant. Her authority had been revealed, her influence recognized, but she maintained the humility and patience that had defined her. From the start, the story that had begun with a moment of humiliation had transformed into one of quiet triumph. The young waitress had shown that dignity, skill, and calm authority could overcome arrogance, that respect is earned through action, and that real power lies in patience, observation, and integrity. Those who had underestimated her now understood, and those who had witnessed her leadership were inspired. And as she locked the doors one final time for the night, she stepped outside into the cool, peaceful air. The city was quiet, and the lights of the restaurant glowed warmly behind her. She smiled softly to herself, knowing that she had faced challenges, demonstrated her strength, and shaped the outcome without raising her voice or demanding attention. Her victory was quiet, profound, and lasting. The world might not always see her power at first glance, but she knew its reach. She had turned humiliation into opportunity, arrogance into respect, in ordinary moments into lasting influence. And in that quiet, unassuming way, she had become a force no one could ignore, a presence felt by all who crossed her path. The young waitress, calm and composed, had truly owned everything without ever needing to prove it loudly.